Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing amazing. This is History is providing us the history of New Zealand. We have done a lot of these countries, and we haven't done New Zealand. It's a interesting little continent. Continent. Well, you could say continent in Zealandia, but no. It's a good little, fun little country over there in the Pacific Oceania region, right next to Australia. It's pretty much, I would say, one of the last countries that have really been colonized in the world. Now there was obviously tribes here long before that probably migrated from the Aztec area where we're talking like Malay and the Philippines and Indonesia and all of those islands, and of course from Asia, most likely, or the Polynesian people as well. That's my immediate guess, but this is history's going to fill all the blanks in. Glad you're here. And of course, the British Empire eventually gets to it. But anyway, let's jump in.
Separated, New Zealand is one of the most geographically isolated countries on the planet, separated by thousands of miles of ocean from the nearest landmasses. However, this isolation has also made it one of the most unique, as it not only boasts immense natural beauty, but also a rich and diverse culture that is unlike anywhere else on Earth. What's even more remarkable is that this human element of New Zealand's history has developed only relatively recently, having been shaped by successive waves of migration from people all over the world in just a matter of centuries. So, how did this nation transform from a set of uninhabited islands less than 1,000 years ago into becoming one of the most sought-after destinations to visit and live in today?
And you can really judge a history of a place by the relics and the things that you can get from a place. Of course, everyone's favorite colonial museum, the British Museum, has a very, very small section in general for Oceania, but even smaller for New Zealand. So relevantly very small when it comes to the history that's been recorded and talked about.
This is the history of New Zealand. Just to let you know that some of the historic maps featured in our videos are now available for purchase through our online map store. Whether you're a history enthusiast, a collector, or simply love the artistry of old maps, you'll find a curated selection of stunning prints to explore.
I love old maps.
These make for perfect wall art, thoughtful gifts, or additions to your personal collection. Follow the link in the video description below to browse our collection and bring a piece of history into your home.
Awesome.
New Zealand is the most recently inhabited landmass on the planet,
Interesting. I thought it was Antarctica.
with the first humans settling there only around 800 years ago, sometime between 1250 and 1300.
The first humans, like that seems like a stretch. What do you guys think? I think there's got to have been people way before that, like tribes that have floated here.
These early settlers, like those across the South Pacific, were Polynesian and were part of a broader movement during this period known as the Great Polynesian Expansion,
Okay,
which
that
saw
makes sense.
significant oceanic exploration and settlements across the entire Pacific Ocean.
So if you want to know that, if you want to see a documentary on that, there's a documentary. You have to download Disney Plus. It's called Moana. It's a good documentary.
This migration is believed to have been carried out by skilled navigators, renowned for their mastery of the stars and ocean currents. Using large ocean-going canoes, known as waka, they traversed vast distances to settle not only in New Zealand, but also as far afield as Hawaii, Easter Island, and possibly even South America.
It's crazy to think about.
When these early settlers arrived in the land we now call New Zealand, or Aotearoa, they became the ancestors of the Māori people.
Yes, and you might know the Maori people if you keep up with politics. Very much a part of the parliament, a very minority of the parliament, and a minority of the people. The Maori, who is a proud native people of descent from these tribes.
Bringing with them their knowledge of navigation, farming, and crafting, as well as a complex social structure and set of spiritual beliefs that would form the foundation of early Maori culture. The Maori quickly established themselves in both the North and South Islands, creating permanent settlements along the coast and river systems. Maori society was built on a strong sense of kinship, with communities organized around tribes, known as iwi, which were defined by bloodlines and shared ancestry. They also developed a sophisticated system of oral traditions known as whakapapa, which recorded their genealogical history, connecting individuals to their ancestors, the
That's
land,
cool.
and spiritual beliefs, thereby forming the backbone of Maori culture. One key cultural practice that emerged during this period was the establishment of fortified villages constructed on elevated land for defense.
Why are you fortifying a village? You gotta keep something out. Who you keeping out? I'm guessing they probably fought each other. Or this is to keep wildlife out. Or something else.
Defensive purposes, known as pa. These settlements protected communities from potential conflicts with rival tribes and also served as social hubs where communal activities such as feasts and religious ceremonies took place. Maori spiritual beliefs were deeply intertwined with daily life, and their worldview revolved around maintaining a balance with the natural world. Their religion was polytheistic, with a pantheon of gods and deities governing various aspects of life, from human creation to the changing seasons and natural resources. Within 200 years of the first humans' arrival to New Zealand, by around the 16th century, Maori society had developed a distinct cultural identity and had grown increasingly complex. Social status was visibly marked through the practice of tattooing, and Maori chiefs, known as rangatira, held significant power and influence.
Yeah, a lot of, at least the individuals I've seen of recent, they'll have facial tattoos in these circular manner. So this is why.
And Maori chiefs, known as rangatira, held significant power and influence. However, their authority relied on consensus and respect within the wider tribe. Leadership was dynamic, with the chief's ability to rule successfully depending not only on their ability to maintain social cohesion, but, more importantly, on their martial prowess in times of war. Intertribal warfare became increasingly common during this period as competition over land and resources intensified. Maori warriors, or tora, were highly skilled in hand-to-hand combat, but as their society did not possess metalworking
See, look, everything that we're seeing is just like reaffirming what I already saw. So it's really interesting. I'm glad that we did this video.
technology at the time, their weapons were primarily made of wood, bone, and stone. As a result, the Maori often employed psychological warfare to intimidate their opponents, notably by performing the haka, a ceremonial dance that was adapted to be used before battle to showcase the strength and unity of the tribe. Life for the Maori in Aotearoa continued largely unchanged for the following decades until the arrival of the first Europeans in the year 1642.
1642. Is this going to be the Portuguese or is it going to be the Dutch?
One problem that these European explorers did not have to face when they arrived in a new country, however, was the inability to access their
Oh, come on. Alright.
The Dutch explorer Abel Tasman sighted the
Dutch.
northwest coast of the South Island during his expedition to chart the lands of the South Pacific. His two ships, the Heemskerk and the Zeehan, anchored in what is now Golden Bay, where they encountered a group of Maori for the first time. However, the meeting quickly turned violent, resulting
As they always do. For some reason. I mean, a foreign ship, larger than life, comes and docks on your beach with these guns, speaking a language you've never heard, wearing clothes you've never saw, fair skin. Yeah. It's not, I mean, I've always thought about this, like you can look two different ways here. You can say, well, they probably, most likely in most of these cases, and I don't want you guys to think that I'm just like a horrible person for saying this. This is my thought. Most cases I've seen is like a native individuals, the people that are living on the island, whether it be those in North America, those in South America, those here usually strike first. They usually strike first. Usually. Not always. Sometimes the Europeans do it. But you got to think about the territorial, like, we're all animals, right? We're all animals. We're mammals, we're primates, so forth. Animals are territorial. Some of them. Most of them, actually. We already had a conversation. These individuals are territorial. Specifically, they've had tribal war. Well, talking about territory and infringing on that, you get this big boat, fair skin, big guns, all this stuff, walking on your beach. What do you do? What do you do? So I always think about that, like, because it's the combination of, do you side with the natives because you got infringement on what they believe is their sovereign, and then you have the colonial. I'll just say the colonial. What does it matter? Dutch, European, Dutch, French, Portuguese, Spanish, English, whatever. They are usually they are coming in their own manner, whether it be for their monarch or for their state, for their company, and they believe it is their God-given right to explore and to manifest. So, and those are strong beliefs. No, either one is can hold a flame against each other. So it's just a hard decision to make when you have to think about it. Who is in the right here? Because one person doesn't understand the sovereignty these people believe they have, and the other people do not understand why these people are coming here to their sovereign. Nevertheless, I think it's about what you do next, not what you do first.
Resulting in the deaths of 4 of Tasman's crew in a skirmish with Maori warriors.
We're going to bang
who
it
had
up, though.
a group of Maori for the first time. However, the meeting quickly turned violent, resulting in the deaths of 4 of Tasman's crew in a skirmish with Maori warriors who had sailed out in their waka canoes.
He didn't mention how many deaths the Maori had, which I always have a problem with. Not because I'm a social justice warrior, but I was, at least, it's not even on This Is History. It's just on, like, human nature. They probably didn't tally how many they killed. But you can probably imagine it probably went both ways, unless they literally just killed 4 of their people and they were that good.
Interpreting the Maori as hostile, Tasman left New Zealand without making landfall. Nevertheless,
and by the way, the reason I was harking so much on this point is because this is the critical, like, hump in history of New Zealand. This contact right here is the most critical point in history for New Zealand.
Yes, his brief visit did subsequently place New Zealand on European maps, and in 1645 it was recorded in Latin as Nova Zealandia, named after the Dutch province of Zeeland. Over 100
I didn't know that. Okay.
years would elapse before European explorers returned to New Zealand. The British, under Captain James Cook, arrived in October 1769 aboard HMS Endeavour, followed just 2 months later by a French expedition led by Jean-François de Surville. Cook, as part of his voyage across the Pacific, made several landings on both the North and South Islands and developed friendly relations with the local Maori, although on some occasions these ended in violent confrontations. He spent a considerable amount of time mapping.
I know, another pause. I'm sorry. Are these islands connected at all? Like a tunnel or a bridge? Just curious. It would feel like you're very disconnected from each other if you didn't have some sort of connection.
New Zealand, which became instrumental not only in his subsequent voyages in 1772 and 1776, but also to other European explorers and traders in later years. Although Cook had claimed New Zealand in the name of Great Britain, any efforts by the British government to send colonists to the territory, as they had done in Australia, did not initially materialise. Instead, the remaining years of the late 18th century saw New Zealand visited by British, French, and American whaling and merchant ships, which traded goods such as iron, tools, and cloth, in exchange for resources like flax, timber, and food. Although there were some conflicts, such as the killing of French explorer Marc-Joseph Marion de Fresnes in 1772, and the massacre of the crew aboard the British ship Boyd in 1809.
Whoa, these are some very interesting stories we'll have to digest one day.
Most contact between the Maori and Europeans was peaceful.
Sounds like something history would have possibly done.
However, there was one particular commodity that the Maori were increasingly eager to acquire from these passing traders: guns. The introduction of firearms into New Zealand had a profound effect on Maori society, sparking a massive intertribal arms race to gain territory or seek revenge for past defeats. In what became known as the Musket Wars, Maori tribes competed fiercely for access to European firearms. The nearly 3,000 battles that were fought between 1806 and 1845 are estimated to have resulted in the deaths of between 20,000 and 40,000 people, dramatically altering the tribal makeup of New Zealand. Within a few decades of the dawn of the 19th century, a handful of these passing sailors had formed New Zealand's first permanent European settlements around the Bay of Islands and Hokianga in Northland.
Okay, so the very tip of the North Island is where we start the colonization.
Some, often runaway sailors or escaped Australian convicts, even settled among the native Maori communities and became known as Pākehā Maori, or European Maori.
Wow.
The early 19th century also saw the arrival of the first missionaries, who began working to convert the Maori to Christianity.
Of course.
Figures such as Samuel Marsden established the first mission to Oihi Bay in 1814, which not only spread the word of Christianity, but also introduced literacy among the Maori, whose language was subsequently recorded in written form for the
That's awesome.
first time. Despite the increasing numbers of British settlers arriving in New Zealand, the territory was not formally considered part of the British Empire. Some parcels of land had been individually purchased by the early settlers and missionaries from the Maori, but by the late 1830s, the increasing activity of the New Zealand Company, a private consortium of British investors seeking to turn New Zealand into a fully functioning commercial colony, had begun to gain traction.
Okay, so before 1830-ish, whatever, this was just like the Wild West, basically.
In 1839, the company announced plans to buy large tracts of land, amounting to nearly 2/3 of the entire country, often by engaging in dubious sales with the native Maori.
Okay.
The British government had previously recognised the concerns over sovereignty raised by the Maori people.
Yeah, that's interesting then, because most times you'd be like, I don't care what you say.
And, alarmed by the ambitions of the New Zealand Company, they temporarily incorporated New Zealand into the official territory of the British colony of New South Wales in Australia, and simultaneously dispatched Captain William Hobson to be New Zealand's new Lieutenant Governor. The following year, on the 6th of February 1840, Hobson and about 40 Maori chiefs signed the Treaty of Waitangi, which formally established British sovereignty over New Zealand, while also granting and protecting the rights of the indigenous Maori people. The treaty subsequently became New Zealand's foundational constitutional document.
Okay, that's cool.
However, as it was written in two separate versions, one in English and the other in Maori, disputes over its interpretation led to challenges and confrontations over land in later years.
Dang.
On the 3rd of May 1841, New Zealand officially became a British Crown colony and fully separate from New South Wales. As a result, it witnessed a dramatic surge in the number of British settlers arriving on its shores. Driven by the opportunity to make a new life for themselves, with the prospect of owning land, thousands of Europeans immigrated to New Zealand during the 1840s and 1850s.
Must have been crazy. Like, this is something that will never happen again, guys. The emigration of mass people to a place because they'll have land. I mean, I just don't see it. I mean, we're just way too populated, and every bit of land's already bought in this world, it seems like. But this day and age, we wouldn't see like this crazy, like, just let's pack up all our things and just go. It's a wild adventure that they were on.
They not only founded new settlements, such as Auckland in 1840 and Christchurch in 1848, but also developed older settlements, such as Wellington, which had been founded back in 1839, and eventually became the nation's capital in 1865.
And that's a very central part of New Zealand right there. So that makes the most sense too. To have that capital right there on that. And it's right by the sea.
Although the Maori had initially been open to the arrival of Europeans, owing to the trading opportunities they brought, it quickly became clear that the sheer number of settlers had been dramatically underestimated. Despite the recognition of Maori sovereignty afforded by the Treaty of Waitangi, disputes over land quickly emerged and began to escalate. The first conflict fought between the British and the Maori was the Flagstaff War of 1845 to 1846. Although this ended in a ceasefire, it would not be the last outbreak of violence between the two groups. As the European population grew, increasing pressure was placed on the Maori to sell more land.
Oh, so they have all this land and they got to sell it to the Europeans and they just keep coming.
Europeans had different concepts of land use for agriculture and settlement, and they viewed Maori reluctance to relinquish control as counterproductive to the colony's progress. Violent confrontations continued from 1845 onwards, but escalated significantly during the 1860s. This series of hostilities, known as the New Zealand Wars,
See, all this conflict, all these stories, all these anecdotal reasons. You got to study this, guys. This is. I will say this already before we get to the end of the video. Leave me some video suggestions specifically about New Zealand, a country forgotten in the mix of every other country, I would say. And some of you guys be like, "No, I live there. I think about it all the time." But yeah, I know you do, but us over here in the United States don't.
saw the deployment of some 18,000 British and Allied Maori troops battle a force of 5,000 Maori resistance fighters who were determined to defend their land at all costs. Eventually, by 1872, the British forces had prevailed and confiscated some 6,000 square miles of Maori land. This left a great deal of bitterness and resentment among the affected communities, which continues to be felt to this day. As the number of British settlers continued to grow, the geographic distance from Britain was seen as an impediment to the colony's development. As a result, in 1852, it was decided to establish a central government in New Zealand to allow the people there to govern themselves with an elected parliament. Throughout the 1850s and early 1860s, the country entered a period of prosperity, with agriculture, particularly sheep farming, becoming dominant. The discovery of gold in the Otago and western regions also led to a surge in new migrants arriving to seek their fortunes.
Okay.
With the
gold
nation's
rush.
population rapidly doubling from just 71,000 in 1859 to 164,000 by 1863.
Dang. And you think a lot of that's attributed to the gold rush, perhaps?
It was not just immigrants predominantly from the British Isles who were arriving in New Zealand during this time, but also smaller numbers from the United States, India, China, and various parts of continental Europe.
Ah, okay.
One such migrant was Gottfried Lindauer from Bohemia, who arrived in New Zealand in 1874. As a trained artist, he quickly found work painting many prominent Maori chiefs and their families, accurately recording their facial tattoos, clothing, ornaments, and weapons.
That's cool.
His works, known as the Maori portraits, offer a fascinating insight into the traditional Maori way of life that might have otherwise been lost to history.
That's awesome.
Despite a brief economic slump during the early 1870s, New Zealand continued on its path of development under the leadership of Sir Julius Vogel, the nation's 8th Prime Minister and the first Jewish person to hold that office.
The nation's 8th. So it's under the Commonwealth of the United Kingdom, though.
He orchestrated a large public works policy that saw the construction of the nation's infrastructure, including new railways and telegraph lines. Further political and social developments in the latter half of the 19th century were carried out under the Liberal government of Prime Minister Richard Seddon. This saw the foundation of a comprehensive welfare state, with the introduction of old age pensions, labour regulations, and minimum wage laws. In 1893, it also extended voting rights to women, making New Zealand the first country in the world to enact universal female suffrage. By the dawn of the 20th century, New Zealand had become one of the most prosperous and developed colonial nations within the British Empire. However, discussions about whether the nation should have greater political independence from Britain were already gaining traction. In 1900, As the neighbouring nation of Australia was undergoing the process of becoming a dominion of the empire, some political leaders entertained the idea of uniting the two colonies.
That would have been insane. That would have been insane.
Many New Zealanders, however, were opposed to the idea, and the two nations ultimately remained separate, with Australia becoming a dominion in 1901 and New Zealand following suit later in 1907.
So becoming a dominion, is that the separation from, like, subservience to the UK?
Dominion status allowed New Zealand to exercise a greater degree of domestic political independence, while retaining constitutional ties to the British monarchy and government, which ultimately remained in control of its foreign policy. This would have dramatic and defining consequences for New Zealand just 7 years later, with the outbreak of the First World War. Although the nation was relatively secure, being located on the far side of the world from the main theatre of the war, New Zealand troops were deployed in the region and seized the territory of German Samoa in 1914. Around 100,000 of its soldiers were sent overseas as part of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, or ANZACs, and served with distinction in major campaigns at Gallipoli.
I was going to say, is this the Gallipoli right here?
The Middle East, and on the Western Front.
Not sure.
Over 18,000 died in the conflict, but their sacrifice became iconic in New Zealand's memory, and is often credited with securing the psychological independence of the nation. The interwar years were a difficult time for New Zealand. It not only suffered the effects of the Great Depression in the 1930s, but the first Labour government, elected in 1935, increasingly put the nation's interests at odds with the mother country, particularly concerning international issues. These tensions were quickly sidelined, however, when war once again broke out in 1939. Although the threat to New Zealand during the Second World War was much greater
because of Japan.
Owing to the Empire of Japan advancing across much of the Indo-Pacific region, most of New Zealand's military forces were committed to fighting the war in Europe and North Africa.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy to think about. Obviously, they're under the Commonwealth, and they kind of like, they're gonna come, but when they're called. But think about like the proximity, specifically of Australia, and the fact that Australia was hit like by bombers, and that's like your sister country, and you're just right there, and this is the sea, and they're in your backyard, and obviously there was probably battalions and such that were stationed, and there was ships probably stationed in the harbors and so forth here to protect this sovereign land. It's a psychological, like it's interesting for sure, but it's quite scary at most common.
As in the previous conflict, the nation rallied and contributed enormously to the war effort by not only raising over 150,000 servicemen, but also providing a vital lifeline to Britain by sending record supplies of foodstuffs and material. Despite having fought for Britain's cause during the conflict, the post-war years saw New Zealand's relationship with the homeland change irreversibly.
What do you mean?
Although it still maintained its predominantly British outlook, the ascendancy of the United States in the Pacific region forced New Zealand, alongside Australia, to look towards America for security.
I mean, yeah, but that's true for pretty much every Western aligned nation.
Rather than rely on the British government far away in London. Closer ties with the United States ultimately resulted in New Zealand committing troops to the Vietnam War in the 1960s.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Which caused a great deal of controversy and protest. Military cooperation with the US continued until 1986, when New Zealand was suspended from the Australia, New Zealand, United States Collective Security Treaty, or ANZUS, after declaring its commitment to a total anti-nuclear policy. The latter half of the 20th century saw New Zealand transform into the nation that it is today. Immigration policy was liberalised, allowing an influx of immigrants from Asia to settle in the country. Simultaneously, British immigration declined, and Australia became the largest contributor to the nation's migrant flows in both directions.
That makes sense.
The Maori people also underwent a form of renaissance during this time, as they sought to reverse the decline in their culture and language that had been ongoing since the early days of European settlement. This led to a change in attitude among many European New Zealanders, with the Maori language becoming an official state language in 1987, and many Maori people themselves becoming active in political life to protect indigenous rights and ways of life.
Awesome.
Today, New Zealand stands out as one of the most sought-after destinations on the planet, not just for those who visit as part of the country's thriving international tourism industry, but also for those looking to make a new permanent home for themselves in the country. This, in many ways, is reflective of the nation's history. For in just over 800 years from the time of the first Maori settlers to today's recent arrivals at Auckland International Airport, New Zealand has offered people coming to its shores from across the world a way of life that is so desirable and unique that simply cannot be found anywhere else.
I mean, as I said before, as always, this is history. Go subscribe to them. Let's get that out of the way. Let's get that out of the way. Go subscribe to them. The link will always be in the description. Very interesting country. Obviously, it's shadowed by Australia in most geopolitical conversations, but its influence not only on a world stage, whether it be on a trade, or even a regional oceanic influence with the ability of this economy to take off, whether it be agriculturally. I'm probably saying most recently, probably doing more manufacturing and industry related stuff, but then also impacting both world wars to aid the Allies is significant. The development of the nation alongside continued keeping the traditions of the Maori people afloat is, you got to give them a round of applause for that, because a lot of times you see those minority groups just get squashed. So amazing here. There's a lot that we're missing though. This is very superficial when it comes to the history of New Zealand. We talked a lot about the people that landed here and the different governments that went in and out, blah, 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 and then how we got to this point through the years. Moral of the story here is New Zealand is such a young country, but it's got a lot of history. It might even have history that predates like the 1200s, which is kind of circulating or circa when the Maori landed from the Polynesian expansion. But besides that, since 1200, they've had an explosiveness. Especially, it's interesting to think about, like, there's the Polynesian tribes that became the Maori. They actually divided themselves, and then they had tribal warfare, and that exacerbated with the imports of gunpowder weapons, and then created a distinct relationship between the European powers, whether it be through land, trade, and eventually war. You got the New Zealand Wars as an interesting time. Overall, good video, good learning. Want some more? Leave me some videos in the comments. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out and bye-bye.